Constraints. There are so many people who don't understand what is constraint and how it works. So that's why I want to explain it to you in this Figma Pro Secrets lesson. This is a fundamental part to understand when you're working with files, because once you understand how constraints work, it will allow you to add just one additional thing as a parameter to the shape or text inside of the frame, and it will completely change the behavior of this frame when the frame will change the size. And this is specifically useful when you're creating, for example, responsive designs, responsive model screens, responsive websites, or you want to create a card where the element inside of the card will change its position when the size of the image will change. How it works, let's go let me show you an example. It will be much easier in this case. So I have a rectangle here, 200 by 200, and I have a frame. And this rectangle, 200 by 200, is inside of the frame. And when I select the shape, this square, this rectangle, you see these lines here. And these lines indicate the indicators of what constraints you have for this particular shape inside of the frame. And here we see the attachment of this shape of this square to the top edge of the frame and the left edge of the frame, which means that if I change the size, just the right and bottom sides of the frame, it doesn't affect the shape, the position of the shape. But if I change the left side, you see that the shape, the square, is moving together with the left edge of the frame. The same with the top one. So I can change the right and bottom and nothing will change with the position of the square. But when I change the top and left one of the frame, my square is moving together with these top and left edges, sides of the frame. When I select the frame, I can choose here from the constraints options different values like parameters for this particular shape inside of the frame. I can set to left top. Here in Figma, they divided it into sections like horizontal one and vertical. And horizontally, I can set left, right, left and right, center, and scale. We'll go through all of them little by little. And for vertical, top, bottom, center, and scale. And you can also, without clicking here, if you want to save your time, you can just click on these sets here. And this is how the constraints will be defined. So now we have right and bottom. It means that when I select the frame and I change its positions, you can see this guy is also moving together with the shapes. And sometimes you see when you change for example, the size of the frame and everything is moving, you're like, what's happening? Most likely the problem is with constraints. And sometimes by default, you can see the constraints as scale. And then you change, for example, now, okay, I created this design for website, for the desktop version. And now I just want to make it shorter, like, the width a little bit narrower, so it will be my tablet option or mobile phone option. And I change the size of the frame, and oh my God, what's happening? What just happened? And the reason is constraints. Constraints, when they set to scale, you're also changing the size of the shape inside of the frame when you're changing the size of the frame. Basically, constraint is the relationship between the edges of the frame and the edges of the shape inside of it. The best option to show it will be this incredible exercise. And I recommend you to follow me with this exercise step by step, so you will understand how it works and you will remember it forever, what constraint is and how to use it. As you can see, I have a frame, Figma Pro Secrets here. And inside of this frame, I have lots of different rectangles, these squares. The frame is 500 by 500 and the squares inside are 40 by 40. Create these squares, create everything the same as what I have. Position all the squares the same as I did. And keep in mind that all the squares should be inside of the frame. And now start moving, changing the size, the height and width of the frame. I will start from here, from this side. And when I'm moving it, as you can see, it moves really weird. We don't understand how it works. Well, in addition to that, I want to remind you that if you don't see something like I do, check if the clip content is on or off. When it's on, you don't see the edges that go outside of the frame. So if you want to see them, click clip content off. As you can see, really weird. But what I want to achieve, what is the final result I want to achieve? I want this square to stay in the top left corner. This one is the bottom left corner. This one is in the top right corner. This one in the middle right corner, and so on and so forth. So I want them, when I'm changing the size of the frame, I want all the squares to stay in their position. And for the middle one, I want to be always inside, like right in the middle of this frame. When I check it by holding Option, I select the frame and I hold Option and I see all measurements, all the distances between the edges of the frame and the shape. This is what I want to see. I want to see that it's always the same from top to bottom, from left to right, from shape to the left edge, from shape to the right edge, from shape to the top side, and from shape to the bottom side. How to do that? I will use constraints. We already know left and top, and we keep it left and top. Now let's select this one and we'll go one by one. And this one I want to be attached to the top and to the center. So it stays always in the middle. And in this case, if I set something like this, center, center, it will change. So I want it to be attached to the top and the center. For this one, I want it to be attached to the center, not to the center, to the top and to the right. So I select here the constraint right and top. For this one, right and center. For this one, bottom and right. For this one, bottom and center, left and bottom, and now left and center. And for the one in the middle, center, center. So now when I select the frame and I change its size, no matter what I'm doing, all the squares stay 40 by 40, and I change the size of the frame, and all these guys are exactly where I want them to be. Please do this exercise. It will help you understand how everything works in Figma when you're working with constraints. Let's bring everything back to 500 by 500. When we have a square, I want to show you a couple of additional options. First of all, I want to tell you where you can use that. Well, when you're creating, for example, a logo, you put the logo in the top left corner and you want it to stay there. So that's why for a logo, you will set the constraint position to the top left. When you're creating a navigation, and if you put navigation in the top middle position, top center, then set the constraint top center. And if, for example, on the right side you have buttons like login, sign up, or something like that, get started, then set the constraints the top right. And this is how you use it in, for example, navigation. Or when you're creating badge, let's imagine, let's create the badge here. 20, this is our card, like notification that people will see. Let's set the background a little bit darker because it doesn't have enough light. You know about light a little bit more now. So this is my model screen, and on top of the model screen I will have this additional badge 130. These are not the exact sizes, I just show you how it works and where you can use it. When we'll start working with auto layout, we'll use a little bit different things here, but this is the example that I want to show you. And now you have this notification, and if you change, this notification will be shown on phone, then everything, let's imagine like everything is just perfect. But then you want to show it, you have a responsive design, and you want to show it somewhere else, and boom, everything just was broken. Why so? Because you haven't set the constraints. So you set this group that you created, and it can be notification badge, and you set the constraint. It's set mixed and top because you selected the group, and inside of the group each of the item has their own constraints, and you can set them for each of the item the constraints that you want, or you can select the entire group and set the constraints for all the items inside of the group, that they will be the same. And for this guy we'll discuss in a minute how this one works. Then when you change the size, you see that the size of the card is changing, but the badge stays always in the top right corner. This is where you need it. And another option will be, another example will be, let's imagine that you created a navigation like this, and here you have in the top left corner you have a logo. Here you have about, contact, and works. It doesn't matter in what direction. Again, this is just an example. And then on the right side you have a button. Let's create it like a button. Again, when we'll start working with auto layout, we will use completely different things here, but as an option I want to show you button, or like sign up. No, the best, get started. And now when the get started is inside of this button, and the button is of different colors, so we see that this is actual button, and get started is white, and this is our button as a group, and it's here. So now this is the website navigation that I created for some kind of a website. And let's imagine now that I want it to look exactly the same on a tablet, but the tablet has a narrow width. So when I move it, like everything is broken again. And you might think like, why Figma then created that everything looks like broken? Why it doesn't follow like particular rules? Well, without constraints themselves, usually by default everything is attached to the top left corner, and it means that it makes you less flexible, less efficient if you just have to every single time to set to put elements, to move elements to their right positions when you're changing the sizes of the frames. But Figma instead created constraints that allow you actually to make you more efficient as a designer. So that's why in this case, for this guy, what we'll set? We'll set left, right, and top. Perfect, done. For this one, we'll set center and top. Perfect. For this one, left and right, left and top. And for the button itself on the right side, it's set to mixed now. Why? Because everything is inside, has different options. But if I set here top and right, So now when I change the size of my navigation, everything works perfectly. So the button stays in the top right corner, the navigation stays in the middle, and the logo stays on the left side. This is how you can use it, and this is how you can apply constraints. This example. Now let's get back to our exercise here, and two things that we haven't discussed yet is left, right, and scale. How does it work? For this one, we will use specifically this element inside of the frame. When you set center, the element stays in the center and it keeps its size. So the size will be exactly as you set it. If it's set, the constraint set to center. But what will change here? The distance between edges will change. So I'm changing the distance, like the size, the width of this frame, and the element stays the same, but the distances here are changing. As you can see, now the distance between left and right side is 121 and 120. Why you see here 121 and 120? Why they're not equal? Well, because currently the width of our frame is 289, and 289 can be is not divisible by 2 to keep the round numbers. So that's why one of the sides will be 1 pixel bigger. But when you change it, as you can see, now it's 208, 207. Okay, so the sizes are changing, from the distance from left and right is changing. When you now select this particular shape and set left and right and top and bottom, here's what's happening. I'm changing the size, and as you can see, something interesting is happening. Now, what's happening when we set left and right? When we set left and right, it means that this distance between top edge of the frame and top side of the shape will always stay the same, because we set it to top and bottom. We said to Figma, keep the distances between sides of the frame and sides of the element that we selected for left and right, top and bottom constraint the same, and they will always be the same. 208, 207, 230, 230. Now when I'm changing the size of just the frame, 230, 230, 208, 207. Always be the same. And as you can see, the only thing that will change the size of the shape. Now, the only thing that is left, sometimes it's super convenient and super useful option when you want to keep the distances from top and left sides of the element the same, and only the element inside will change. This is useful also when you're designing responsive websites. And now the only option that is left is scale. When you set scale and scale, what does it mean? It works together. It changes the sizes of the distance between the edges of the shape and the edges of the frame, but at the same time it changes the size of the element itself. So when I'm changing the size of the shape, as you can see, the size of the shape is changing, but also the distance between the edges of the frame and edges of the shape are changing as well. And they're changing in the proportion of from what we had in the beginning. So let's imagine that. Let's set it to center. So we have a particular size. Let's set the Figma size to 400, 400. So now the shape of it, the size of the shape is 40 by 40. The size of the frame 400 by 400, and the distance between everything is 1 80, 180. And if I now change this constraint to scale and scale, select the frame, press here in the width and multiply this width by 2, it means that the size of the frame should be 400 by 400. The size of the element inside should be 80, 80, and the distances will be 360. So 180 multiple 2, 360, 360. And let's check. Multiple 2. Oh, and by default, let's set the proportions. So now I select the element and it's 80, 80, and the distance 360, 360. So this is how scale works. Now, when you have an element inside of the frame and you need this element to be attached to a particular side of this frame, keep in mind this particular thing that I just showed to you, because it will make you much more efficient, and this is a real advanced understanding. If you understand how constraints work, this is plus 5 points to you as a more efficient and more advanced designer. And later you will be able to use this understanding in the future when you're creating, for example, buttons. Let's imagine that you create a phone like this, and inside of it you create a button. We will use auto layout, but just for these purposes, for the training purposes, let's go with a less advanced option here. And you create a button. Not bottom, but button. And here this button, and let's change the typeface to something that probably you have on your computer. Maybe you don't have Helvetica New LT Pro. So Command G, now this is my button. By the way, to rename the file, press Command R and it will change here. We will discuss it in the next things, how to rename and everything, how to rename lots of different files at the same time. So button, we have button here, and usually the button is somewhere at the bottom, especially when we go through the like the first screens where a person provides their information. They want to skip the intro before the app, so we have a button here. And now let's imagine that you want to design something for the device. So the frame size is not exactly iPhone 13 mini, but iPhone 14 Pro Max. You press here and the button stays in the middle, and at the same time it stays on its position. Why so? Let's check constraints. The constraints are center and top. So the distance from the top stay the same, and constraints like the sides will be keeps the same because the button stays in the middle, in the center of this screen. What we're gonna do now, we want our button, let's remove it. We want our button, no matter how big the size of the screen becomes, we want our button to stay at the bottom, to be attached at the bottom. And if the width of the frame is changing, we want the distance from left and right to stay 40 and 40. To do that, what we know? We know that it should be attached to the bottom, which means that we set constraint for the button bottom. And we also want that the left and right, the distance between the left and right, to stay the same, 40, 40. And as you remember, it's left and right. Now, it's like, it's like attach hooks to the edges of the shape and to the sides of the frame. And when you change the sizes of the frame, depending on what hooks attached to this element, those parameters will change. And now I understand that what parameters will change? Well, the size of the The width of the button will change if I change the width of the frame, but from the bottom the distance will be the same. So now when I take the same frame and select here 14 Pro Max, which is wider and taller, and when I click that, my button stays at the bottom and the edges of the element jump down. But as you can see, the word button itself is not in the middle. Why so? Because we set the same parameters for the group, and for the group is left and right, everything is correct. And when I select the inside, the button, it's left and right, kinda everything is select. But the problem here is that the button has the parameter text align left. In the next lesson, we'll talk about text parameters and how to work with text with all these different features. But for now, just keep in mind that if you see something like this, so probably you have two options: to change the text alignment to center, and then the button will be here. Or if you want everything to work as it should be, just select the button itself inside of the group and specifically for the text, set it to center. So now, when I select this item, let me check that I set everything correct. Yep. So when I select the item and I change the frame to iPhone 14 Pro Max, the word button itself is in the center. The button is wider. Let's check. The distance from left and right is 40-40. From bottom is 60. I select here 40-40, 60. So as you can see, constraints allow you to set everything in the first file that you created, and later when you need to change frame size for a particular device, everything will be adapted, everything will be optimized for that screen. And in the next lesson, let's talk about text, because set it to center is not the best option and sometimes, because now if I haven't changed the text alignment to anything else and I start typing something, everything will be written from left to right instead of from the middle. And it will be something like this. And this is not what we want. What we want it to be something like this. How to use it, how to work with that, let's talk about it in the next lesson. As of now, go follow this exercise and practice. Take a look what's happening when you set different constraints for different shapes inside of your frame. Play with it, understand, analyze, and then once you master constraints, trust me, you will become much more efficient designer. See you in the next lesson.